Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Finding Common Battlegrounds. This is the podcast dedicated to finding common ground on both the left and the right. It's a podcast of civility. That's what I'm going to call it. We have a full house tonight. We've got Josh, Ryan, and we have a special guest, Vance, from the Independent Center. We're going to be talking about a few subjects. We're going to be talking about independent voters and how they're going to factor into the election. Are they going to decide the election? Are they critical to the election? And we're also going to be talking about academic research. Is there a crisis in academic publishing? So we're going to talk about those two. Just as the format goes, Ryan represents the liberal perspective, and Josh and I represent the conservative side. Vance, we're going to find out where you are, and we'll
presumably he's an independent.
Surprise!
Right? Yeah.
One would hope. He's like a flaming liberal. I represent the Independent Center. But
I better be somewhere in the indepent grouping there.
We're gonna assume that. Yeah.
I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan, but
No.
Let's first we'll talk about our sponsor, Lux Bidets. We're all big fans here, but Vance, we want to get your point of view. Big bidet fan. Do you bidet or what?
You know, I don't mind the idea of a bidet, and I've had the opportunity of being in Japan and experiencing those fantastic, technologically amazing toilet situations. So I'm all for this. Like, yes, we need to sort this out.
All right.
Excellent.
I think he just went to the yes.
Good
he
man.
just went to the top
man.
of our guest list right there. I think he's the first one who's like, yeah, I love bidets, right?
Oh yeah. I want to start a saving account for one of those Japanese ones. Like, yeah.
There you go.
The first one that just wasn't shocked by the question. Like, he just ran with it.
Yeah.
So that is in fact our sponsor, Lux Bidets. So we always have to do a shout out, and when we have guests, we put them on the spot. Kind of ask it. So you did great.
I'm all for it. I'm right there with you, all for it.
Excellent.
So.
Good man.
All right. I used to live in Japan, so yeah, very familiar with the squatters, the bidets, all that action.
Oh, all those wonderful options from water temperatures to air drying. I mean, it's just insane. It's like you could spend a lot more time in the bathroom than you ever thought.
They're centuries ahead of us. All right, let's jump into our subject, independent voters. Do we want Vance? Do you want to introduce the subject and the topic, and then we'll just kind of take sides and we can all give our take on it?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, you know, I work with the Independent Center. I do a lot of technology and data work for them, and apply AI work that we do, machine learning work to the data and work we do. And what we're really doing, our mission is to help raise the voices of independent voting Americans and make sure their voices are heard. We do the research, analyses, and try to get that to the forefront of press, media, social, online, whatever it is, so that those voices are heard and that they're having an effect on the public policy debate in this country.
Excellent. Can you just give us a quick sense, because I'm assuming you've got these numbers right off the top of your head, but what percentage of the electorate in the US are independent voters at this point?
I mean, this is the fascinating set of data stats that we start getting into. Pew had some research out just recently that had it up as high as 51% of Americans are self-identified as independent voters now. And, you know, whether it's 48, 47, 51, it doesn't really matter that specific number. What we have seen, though, for a long time now, that the plurality of American voters are, in fact, identifying as independent voters. And we've seen the portion that identify of one of the major parties, one of the two main parties, steadily reduced. You know, they're in the mid to upper 20s, you know, again, depending on what poll you ask and that sort of stuff. Sometimes we see them in 30, but we are seeing now consistently that independents are making up the plurality. And one of the biggest shifts we've seen, and one of the biggest reasons we're seeing this, is millennial and Gen Z generation voters. They are very much, sitting in the independent camp. And we always assume that, oh yeah, when you're young, you'll eventually sort out and you'll choose one of the two main parties, you'll go that way. And we're not seeing that. I mean, I think we all got to get over the fact, or a lot of people need to get over the fact that millennials, you know what, they're not in their 20s anymore. They're in their 40s and they're having kids and houses and everything. You're not young kids anymore, right? And Gen Zs aren't either. They're in the voting age group now too, but we're not seeing them turn to the main parties. They're staying as independents more often than not.
So that's, yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Vance, so My take is so let me see what you think about this. So my take is that the Democrat and Republican parties have sort of not only have they been polarizing, but and they're kind of more pandering to the extremes. But and I do see this, right, that the independent voters are sort of being abandoned, and they've sort of like taken control. You especially see this in the primaries, right? Where you see in the primary races, right, they're very much speaking to their base, and then and then once you get in the general, they try to like talk more to the, get more moderate, but still, I mean, I don't know, with the rise of populism lately, right? I think they're still really pandering to their bases. And you're just not like independents are basically being abandoned. Like, what is that the accurate narrative?
You've absolutely nailed one of the biggest issues, and that is, we really look at the primary system in the sense that exactly like what you described. To get across the line in the primaries, you do have to really appeal to that activist base, the ideologues in your group who are going to come up and vote in a primary. And therefore, you end up with a lot of candidates that, sure, they're absolutely on target to the activist base, but they're not necessarily as acceptable to the general population as a whole, to the independent population, the independent voters. So you end up in this problem where, yeah, you've got this great enthusiasm in the primary side, and it looks great, and you're going out there with all kinds of things and plans and policies and that, and then bang, you become the candidate, and then you having to hit the wall of all voters, and suddenly people aren't as impressed anymore and not as interested anymore. So that is definitely an issue we're seeing. And I think there's candidate qualities on both, or issues with candidate quality on both sides. It's not just one party or the other party. It is both sides, because they both suffer through this sort of process. So yeah, that's an issue for sure.
Why can't, like, so we had RFK, right? This last election cycle running as an independent, or did he have a specific party? I think he was independent.
Independent, yeah.
Why couldn't he get traction, right? This is massive base, right? That's probably looking. I am a fan of him, and I would have voted for him if he hadn't dropped out. And I'm bothered that no one seems to be able to get traction here with this big group, right? Apparently a massive group that's probably the majority group now. And what's going on? What's your take on why nothing's taken hold?
I think there's a couple of things in that. One of them is the nature of it being a presidential ballot. I mean, culturally, I'm not American originally, but culturally, you're conditioned in the States and to one or the other. It's an R or D, it's a left or right. It's a binary choice.
Wait. You're not American? You're
Canadian.
Canadian or something in here?
I'm a Canadian Australian, yeah. So
who let the Canadian?
Wow. I know, who's let one of them in, right? Come on, right?
That's why he's so nice, guys. That's why he's so nice.
This is why I'm independent. I can be outside of it.
You are not gonna fit in here, Vance. Canadians are too nice.
So we got that. I can go now.
No. We're gonna rake you over the coals tonight. We got you.
Sorry to derail your
right on the
train of thought.
presidential, on the presidential side, we end up in these binary choice all the time, and that's just part of the conditioning, I think. But yeah, RFK made a huge amount of support in there. But I think a lot of the time with the focus on independent candidates has been in the presidential run. I mean, we've seen it a few times now. There's been spoilers on left and right with this, and I mean, I think it's that focus that it's. I guess something just appeals to run as a presidential candidate, when really the focus needs to be on what are the local elections, the state level, the down ticket races, where I think independents seem to be more responsive to their local environment, or seem to be very connected into a local issue often, something that really matters to their district or their part of their state.
Are you because like even in the Senate races, right? We're not seeing. I don't think there's any independent senators, and I don't know about the House, but this is pretty rare, right, to get independents, and it's usually they'll be one party and then leave, right, and become independent, run as an independent. So I'm so that even there, it's nothing taking hold.
We have one interesting race in Nebraska this year. I mean, that's a very interesting one there with Dan Osborne in that space. There's a few a few in the state and a few running at Congress level, but yeah, they're not, the money side is one thing, obviously. These campaigns are enormously expensive, and the infrastructure needed to run a successful campaign is just not something that without a party or without some support to provide that infrastructure, you can build up. really easily. The parties are very professional in this. They've got machines that run this sort of stuff. They've got get out the vote machines. They've got the money. They've got the professional groups of people that can do this. A lot of times, independents, they're working off a lot of volunteers, a lot of sweat. And they're looking for help, and they don't have the legal help either to make sure they get on the ballot or to support them, their case in. They just get everything thrown at them, so that they're constantly having to, they're constantly behind, in that sense that they can't afford the best lawyers, they can't afford the best campaign people. So it just, it's stacked against them in that way. It does make it really hard to break into this. Almost, it is an oligopoly, really. Breaking in is hard. Expensive.
Is it just because the two parties have a stranglehold? They have a monopoly on the whole system? Is that because if we're at 51%,
I mean, just look at how much RFK Jr. had to fight to get on the ballot in some of these states, and didn't actually get on the ballot, which is why there was talk about joining the Libertarian ballot because they're on all the state ballots. A man like that, that kind of name recognition, that kind of money, couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Well, I listened to a podcast of him getting interviewed by Jordan Peterson yesterday, and he talked about how Ross Perot, when he was a spoiler years ago, he was on all sorts of interviews and he had plenty of airtime, and he got into debates, and RFK couldn't get into any of them. Yeah. And he had like 2 live interviews. Why is it worse if we have more independents now? Is it just the monopoly by the two-party system?
I think so. And I think the dollars are very different nowadays than they were back then too. I mean, I think in that time, I'm not sure we even had the funding of campaigns through the super PACs. I think that's changed since then. Election funding. They've become, the legal warfare over elections has certainly gotten more intense since that point too. So, I think it's just, you just become very much it's a battle, and they want to keep everybody else out. And it's one of those things I don't know, I don't have any data to support this, but when you get back to the corner and we've got all these people now saying they're independents, it's almost like you double down and fight it even harder rather than saying, all right, well, what do we do to go into the center and grab these independents? Right. No, instead, let's fight to keep them out. Let's man the barriers. Let's put up the walls. Let's do everything to keep them out and keep fighting for that little dwindling base that we've got, without realizing that actually you got to take the risk and go out instead of, putting the walls up and holding everybody in.
So I found that interesting in that interview. RFK said that when he quit the campaign, he reached out to Trump and said, hey, maybe we should join forces. And Trump was very receptive, and they talked. And then he reached out to Kamala, and she said, no, go away.
Yeah.
So that kind of talks about what you just said there. She's like, yeah, I'm not interested in the center. I'm going to just keep, even though some of her policies and suddenly cracking down on the border, she is trying to cater more to that center base. But that's interesting.
I think we've seen both candidates start to throw some pieces of policy out there, float some trial balloons that are a little bit more centrist, independent oriented. Whether they've been successful in doing that, I'm not really sure they're moving that many. I mean, I think the Harris campaign has certainly moved some that were probably already leaning that way a little bit, but I'm not sure either of them have come up with anything that's coherent enough yet that the independent voters are necessarily truly swayed yet. And I think that's just because, it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's not something that I could say, hey, this is real leadership and something that's offering a real vision of what a more independent, centrist, or moderate policy platform would be.
We have leaders in this country?
One of the things I've been a big proponent of is IVR IRV, instant runoff voting, or ranked voting. Ranked choice voting. And this is the idea that if your first choice for candidate doesn't win, that your votes will get put to another candidate. And that's to combat the spoiler effect, right? This is the idea that when Ross Perot ran, right, that helped Bill Clinton get into office because Ross Perot was taking a lot of more votes from Bush than he was from Clinton. And so, and you see that now, right, where RFK is being intentionally left on the ballot in some states in order to hurt Trump, right, and taken off in other states, and you can see that weaponization of the spoiler effect. And so I assume the parties they're like against doing this because they want the spoiler effect, because it discourages people from voting for that independent person. And like, do you agree with that? And do you agree that this is the good voting method? And do you think we can ever get there? Right.
I think I really like a lot of these different electoral reforms that we're looking at around ranked choice or instant majority, or all the flavors in that preferential set of voting. And it's quite familiar with where I've lived in my life as well, and different countries that have those systems. And I think there's every system has its negatives and positives, right? But I do think that would be a way of opening up more democracy and more viewpoints and more voices into the overall discussion. And I think that would have a positive effect, because if you can bring more voices into, more candidates of different stripes and walks of life and experiences, bring them in there and get their voices heard, that's going to resonate with a larger group of people that right now it's probably not resonating with at all. Doesn't mean they're going to win, but it would be good to hear voices that sound like your voices, or talk about the things that you care about, at least at some level in the discussion, at some point in that debate, at some point in that campaign, right? Doesn't mean they have to win, but you still feel at least something was in there for you. Someone was participating on your behalf. So I'm a big fan of those. And what we see in the independent polling that we do a lot of polling in these areas, and we've had I think our August poll, we asked a lot of questions around ranked choice and instant majority. And, generally we're seeing very high support for that, more support for it than staying with existing. And we also see in certain cohorts of the audience, different demographics or different groups, more supportive of it than others. So we definitely know with new Americans, they tend to be more supportive of it, probably because they come from countries that have multi-party systems and maybe they have ranked choice or some version of that already. So it's familiar with them. This idea of having two choices is not familiar to them. Mm-hmm. And that's a very large portion of the population these days when you think of new Americans and immigrant Americans that are, voting in these elections. So we're seeing more of that. We're also seeing in the younger generations more openness to the idea of having more voices and more opportunity. They want to see choices. And this is one of the things we've really been able to see in all of the data work we're doing on independents especially, is that they like choices. They want to see more choices. They want to be given the power to make choices. Our pollster always says, it's like, all right, well, if I ask you your favorite flavor, chocolate, strawberry, or vanilla, what would it be? And you choose strawberry. No, but you have to choose between chocolate and vanilla. Well, then why did you ask me in the first place about the third choice? So let's get over that. People
you have to choose chocolate because you're racist.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay, Vance, how do we get there? Because you're telling me the plurality of the people, 51%, are now independent. We've been one of the few things. I mean, not few things, but one of the things
we agree on lots of things.
We found common ground on ranked choice voting, and that we both hate the two-party system. We've been talking about this for years. How do we break into that monopoly with this plurality of voters? Because this election, we still have two chucklehead candidates up there. Yeah. I'm not happy with either one. I don't think Ryan's happy with either one. I know Tom's not happy. How do we break into that monopoly? Because that's really what it is. And I don't see a way. I mean, it's a no-brainer. Ranked choice voting is a no-brainer to me. I don't see us getting any closer to it. So
sure, but it's a major threat to the two parties.
Exactly, and so they're going to keep it out. How do we break through? How do we get a presidential candidate that's actually an independent?
Yeah, this is the same issue of term limits, right? It's most of the most citizens are in favor of it, but it's never going to happen, right? Because it's against their interests.
Yeah, and I think there's a few of those issues that fall in that bucket. That's like, well, how do we make this change? And it seems, if you're looking at it from the top down, it's like, yeah, this is how do we ever make this happen? It's just not happening. But then if we look at some case by case, we look at Alaska, where we have a version of ranked choice voting. Mm-hmm. Look at California with its jungle primaries. It's on the ballot in Nevada right now as well. So we've got examples where this is happening. And I mean, that's truly one of the great things about the states, in that you've got all these little laboratories of each state doing this, local things happening. And I think that's part of it. I think not enough people know what actually all the experimentation that is happening. And we can't say it's all perfectly working by any means. We have to honestly look at it and go, hey, well, what worked really well in this state? What worked really well in this state? All right, let's putting together the good things that happened. Let's figure out the bad things that didn't work. And let's just have a conversation about it. But we have to have that conversation. And right now we're largely blocked. We're not having that conversation because we've got two parties that don't want us to have that conversation. I mean, that really comes down to the core of a lot of what we're doing at the Independent Center. When we started doing research a couple of years on, like, okay, is there actually independent voters in the States? Or are they really just D's and R's that haven't made their mind up, right? We went out there, and, I'm an AI guy, and we went to look for, well, okay, what does the data say? Let's build some models. Let's figure out how we can do this. We got there, we went like, actually, the whole data universe here is D's and R's. you go to buy voter data from one of the major firms, and it's, well, what do you want? Do you want R+1, R+2, R+10, D on the D side? It's like, no, I actually want to know, do you have independence? Well, we've got people that are, loosely affiliated. Well, no, that's not an independent necessarily. So we stepped back and we started doing some research to say, has anyone actually studied independence from an independent lens? Because if you're studying from the lens of the right or the left, then you're already biasing how you're looking at this, and you're not going to come up with the right messaging. You're not going to use the right language. You're not probably going to hit them with the things that matter and going to motivate that group to actually engage and want to agitate for change. So we had to step back, and that's why we call ourselves a movement, because we said, let's analyze this from an independent lens. Let's do the data work. Let's actually get in there and do the hard yards and figure out, first of all, do independents exist as a group? Are they cohesive enough to, say, yes, independents could be a group? We found they are. They're actually more cohesive in their policies on economics and social areas than the two parties, surprisingly. And then next is, all right, let's review, let's look at the messaging and how we talk about issues and see if we've got bias, left or D or R, left-right bias on that. And yes, we do. Not a surprise. Look at our media. All right, well, if we could take that bias out and write things or message from an independent angle, can we get more engagement? Can we get them to care? Can we get them to feel their voices are being heard and therefore want to get involved in politics or protest or do anything, right? Any action. And yes, we could. We realized that was possible. So I think it comes down to doing the hard work to say, we are not a DNR universe. We are actually much more multifaceted than that. So let's talk like we are, and let's analyze information and produce information around that so we can start building that up. That was a long answer to that question. Sorry.
I love the answer though. Do you,
what are jungle primaries? Explain what those are.
Two top candidates in California get to go to the final.
Could be so like a runoff.
2 hours. I mean, it could be 2 hours, but not in the current universe in California. But two Ds, two Democrats could be your candidates to choose from.
Interesting.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Do you find that there's any like bad crossover from like the Libertarian Party? Because I'm like a small L libertarian, but the leadership, they're a bunch of marijuana smoking hippies that are a bunch of morons, right? I can't vote for these idiots because they're basically anarchists. Is there bad overlap publicity from that in the independent movement?
I think there's a little bit of that. And again, it's probably the electorate is not highly experienced at having multiple different groups on the ballot or parties. And so it's a little easier to characterize the libertarians as, the crazies out the back, backyard and whatever, herding cats, all that sort of stuff. We hear all kinds of things like that. So I think maybe that does possibly affect that, but we do see in the independents, when we analyze them, they do cross over and have a fair amount of shared values with certainly a number of the libertarians. Not all the libertarians. They do get a little crazy on some of the edges, of course, but there's certainly some shared space. And I think that comes down to that idea of choice. We really know independents like to have choices for what they want to do, make for their communities, their families, themselves. That's not too far away from a libertarian value in that sense.
Yeah. I do have a question, then I want to get to our main question for you. We haven't gotten to the real question that we were going to talk about, but so one last question for me, and maybe the others have one, but for years, I actually identified as an independent, okay, for a very long time. And then I moved here to Florida, and here in Florida, you have to register for a party to vote in the primaries. And that's what pushed me to finally register as a Democrat, because I wanted to vote in the primaries. So how big of a problem is it that you have these primaries that are basically tied to being registered for a party that ends up pushing people out of being independents, when in fact, that's probably where my heart lies. And I don't ever vote a straight ballot that's just like all Democrat, all Republican. Yeah, I lean to the left, right? But I vote by the candidate, I vote by the issue. I'm a much more complicated voter than that. So what's going on there?
You've come that, I mean, we could spend an hour on that one alone, but yeah, you're spot on. And every day I get messages, from our website from people joining our list to sign up to support us, and they're saying that exact issue in their state. They cannot register as an independent. Therefore, they either can't participate in a primary, or they have to say I'm a D or an R and pretend to participate. I mean, right away, again, I keep coming back to this point that when we talk to people, they tell us their voices aren't being heard in DC by their politicians, by the leadership. this is one of the big reasons why you're not actually even participating in the primary level, let alone, feeling happy about where it goes from there. So that is a big problem. It doesn't happen in all states, but it's enough states that it is a big problem. We hear about it every day. Someone's complaining about that, wishing there was a way they could get around it. Yeah, it does affect, I think, people's interest in the system too, and maybe even trust. I mean, we need our institutions to be trusted. And if you feel you can't even participate at the start of that process, then how are you going to feel you have any trust in what comes out of that process? You don't have to like what comes out of it, but you do need to trust the process was representative. And to me, that doesn't sound very representative. I'm not involved.
Yeah.
Ryan and I have talked about this before, but I brought up the statistic that like 50 years ago, people's, opinions on like certain political topics were quite ranged, right? And it was like broad range. And over the last, 50 years, they've become much more polarized. So and it's basically exactly what Ryan's saying, right? We're all getting pushed to one side or the other, right? And you're like, oh, well, if you're a Republican, you have to believe this and you have to believe this, right? And it's this package deal that you have to take. And it's harder for, I think, candidates to be outside, right, the platform and be like, well, I believe, and they're like, well, you're not a true Republican then, or a true Democrat, and they get beat up about it. I think, to me, it's part of the problem, and they want to package us right into these little things when really we should have diversity of thought and opinion, and like I think that's good. But
I think the parties were probably much bigger tent parties in the past, and they have become probably a little less smaller tents. And yeah, you got to be a bit more pure in terms of your ideology to still be acceptable in the group and in the in crowd. There does seem to be a little bit about that, but it could also be that independents are just dropping out of the parties or just not bothering, and that's leaving a base that is more pure. And of course, what does that do? It only just generates more, that same sort of virtuous or vicious circle of that behavior. If those voices aren't inside the tent and being heard or being allowed to be heard, then yeah, you do end up with less diversity in each of those groups. And that is a real problem. And, it's interesting on the point of policies and that what we do see in independence that, it exists everywhere, but we really see that the independent voters are really good at connecting issues. We do a lot of data work and seeing when they look at an issue, say criminal justice reform or immigration, they're not looking at just that one issue in a silo and saying, do this or don't do that. They're actually making the connections that, oh, well, this does have an effect on the economy. It does have an effect on jobs. It will have an effect on, the community, or education would have an effect on community safety, et cetera. They're really pulling together quite a lot of issues, which I think is really something special about the independent voters, that we can see that how much they do pull those issues together. And I think that's what also gets them in trouble, because like you said, you split your ticket. And it makes it look like independents are just these a la carte voters. Well, I want a little bit here and I want a little bit here and I want a little bit up there. Well, they're not actually. It's not that it's not an ad hoc a la carte sort of thing. It's that they actually do see connections between the issues. So therefore, they're going to look for some coherence in that platform or coherence in their candidates that too often it's just not there. We saw this in 2022. Everyone was expecting a red wave, and our data said, no, not going to happen. And this is despite the vast majority of people saying affordability and inflation, the number one issue. We all still is, right? Everyone still says it's the number one issue. So it should seem that if affordability and inflation is the number one issue for everyone, we should be able to have some coherence on that. But what people aren't seeing is that in this independent group, especially, they have some lines they won't cross. And it may not be their top issue. And abortion, gay marriage, and climate denialism are those lines that they just won't, most of them just will not cross. Doesn't mean they're going to do anything about the climate necessarily, but they certainly aren't denying that it's changing. And that is not a top issue for a lot of people, but it is enough of an issue to say, you know what, if the candidate can't come to terms with that, that's a line I won't cross, so I'll vote for the other party or I'll split my ticket. So it's an interesting reaction that we're seeing. And I think it's at play in this election too.
Yeah,
what
let's talk about this.
What I just heard was Vance Reavey just said independents are way smarter and Democrats and Republicans are idiots. That's Vance Reavey, R-E-A-V-I-E.
No worries. I'll get kicked out before I know it at this rate.
It did kind of come across that way, but
I didn't mean it to come across that way. It's just what our data says. That's what our data says. I wasn't saying what the other people's data.
But it actually makes a lot of sense, because in my mind, one of the hardest obstacles to get rid of the two-party system is to convince people to when they're in the ballot box to not hit the one dot that says vote all Democrat, right?
Yeah.
So independents picking and choosing and actually being concerned about the issues and tying issues together, that makes a ton of sense what you're saying, because it's a temptation for me when the ballot comes to just hit R and like hold my nose, go, okay, all Republican, right? That makes a lot of sense.
I think there's one American company that calls it the easy button, and I think that's what happens a lot of the time.
I like it.
Yeah,
I know in Australia, because they have preferential voting, one of the things that really struck me when I moved there and lived there was that the parties outside the ballot boxes hand out a how to vote card, because there's so many people to vote for, so many selections, and they want to preference them in the order they want to. They've done some trade-offs on some policies. Like, if you give us your preferences, we'll give you our preferences, but you have to support us on this economic policy. We'll support you on this, social policy, whatever it is. They make these trade-offs, and then they tell their supporters to say, yeah, go 1, 2, 3 in this with these names against it. So it's kind of fun to see some of these things, how they happen, but yeah.
Yeah,
but don't quote me that the independents are more intelligent. No, I mean, we are, obviously, right? But
Utah still has a caucus system, and I've been a delegate many times there. And yeah, they'll very much at these conventions, they'll hand out these voter cards, right? They'll be like, here's what you should vote for. Just vote these people for this thing. It's very interesting strategy. But let's talk about this election, right? Because you kind of made a few comments already. Like, yeah, what do you see how do you see independent voters like affecting the election? Like how do you think this is going to play out? We're just over a month away, and we're
voting started.
Yeah, voting has started.
Like, we're already in it. So yeah, that's the wild thing about this. Look, the margins of error, I mean, we're all obsessed with the polls that one day it's Trump up 1 in Pennsylvania, the next day it's Harris up 1 in Pennsylvania. We're all still in the margin of error on all of these polls of every one of these swing states. So really, it's anyone's game yet. And it is turning into an election of rather a yes, but who you won't vote for. So it's, we've already passed that die, and that's sort of solid. So in any one of these cases, it is a very small group of voters that need to be brought over, convinced to vote or convinced to, tick this box and not that one, to change the result in any one of those states. We did a survey back in February, just on the LGBTQ vote, and looking at a number of the swing states. And we found much, and I don't think this is another thing, we just look for different angles on voting data. We found that you'd only need to move 18% of that cohort in any one of those swing states, and it would have changed the last election. That's not very many votes. 18% of a group that's 7% of the voting population, or 8% of the voting population. That's a pretty tiny amount. That's a few thousand votes here and there, right? That would have changed the last election, and we found it would change this one too. So you can really start to see why both of the presidential candidates are throwing policies out there that are just highly, highly targeted to very, very, small groups, and not broad policies. Like, if you're talking about taxing tips, I mean, we're talking about a very small group of people necessarily that would benefit, but they are being very targeted to thinking that, yeah, we need to get 1,000 more votes here, 5,000 more votes here. Is really down to that small of a number right now. So independents obviously are the ones to play for. There's some undecided out there, but the independents are ones to play for, and they need to, if you can find something that works with them, you're gonna make a difference and take that state. So they're really in the pole position, which is an exciting spot to be for an independent. Unfortunately, like you guys said, too bad we don't have some, maybe better quality candidates, or candidates that, like, independents are really excited about. And there's certainly good qualities about both of them. I don't mean it negatively, but
still, right. And if they were smart, they should be making a play then for some targeting at least some cohort within the independents to try to get them over to their side. I don't see that happening a lot right now.
I don't see it happening either, and I'm really disappointed. I thought they would come into that pretty heavy. But what we see is they're spending, I mean, unparalleled amount of money in this, and it really just seems to be spent to keep their own existing voters excited, and what's red is already, what's blue is already going to be blue. It doesn't seem to be moving the needle much, and we've done a lot of analysis on ad spending and sentiment, and does it actually have an effect and change people? What we found generally is that in 2022, the last data we were able to work off of, it really barely swayed any vote at all. All the money spent across social and all that, it barely swayed anybody. There was neither negative nor positive.
It just seems so obvious, right? Like, the dyed-in-the-wool Trump supporters I know, they're not going to be like, oh, look at this Kamala interview. I'm voting for her.
I'll change everything now that I've seen that.
Exactly. and vice versa.
Yeah.
Like, that's insane that they're spending that much money catering to their base. That's weird.
So I think this is where we get to that point of coherence. Okay, float out a policy, like a tip, the non-taxing and tips, all right, that's one thing. But if you're going to get to the independents, I think you've really got to get to something a bit meatier than that and a bit bigger that affects,
What are the
more their
issues
life.
that would cater to independents? What do you think there?
Well, we know education is really, really important. We've done a lot of polling and a lot of data work on this, and our data and independents show that it's not just public, it's not just private, it's give people choices, what's best for their community and their kids. And, if you're in a rural area, your public school is your best choice in most cases. And I come from a rural area, so I know that, right? You don't have another private choice. So you can't say one or the other. So you have to have policies that appealing to those independents making the decisions that are best for their situation and where they are. So education is a really, really important one we see on that. Another area would be in entrepreneurship in those areas. There's a lot of people on the independent side that are small business people or big business people too, but a lot of entrepreneurs on that side. A lot of new Americans are entrepreneurs. They've gone to university in the States, they start a tech company, whatever it is like that, right? So, again, something more coherent on, come on, it's the American dream, right? Start a business, be successful, that sort of stuff. And why aren't we talking about that in any big way with, any real way? We've got, the Harris campaign certainly has put out some information on the opportunity economy, and Trump certainly does talk to a lot of the business points, but I don't think either of them have really strongly taken that and said, we could run with this and really attract, the mainstream voter who's maybe got a small service business and looking to grow it and, wants to provide for their family and be a good middle class or upper middle class or whatever, however big they grow it, right?
You mentioned a couple of hard in the lines in the sand issues. You mentioned climate change as one. What were the other two? I think you mentioned two others.
Women's reproductive rights, climate change, and gay marriage. Now, our data shows that there's not extremism on any of these in the independent crowd. And they're not all 100% on one point of this, but they generally will not go with the candidate that doesn't at least, accept that, yeah, gay marriage is not an issue anymore. It's signed, sealed, and delivered, done. Climate change, it's happening. Doesn't mean they're going to participate in doing anything necessarily about it, but they're not sitting there denying it and saying it doesn't exist anymore. And then, so those are the issues we found that and women's choice on reproductive rights. That's just absolutely one. We just have so much data that shows lots of people not saying they support abortion and having abortions, but they're saying we're not going to deny women that choice. We had interviews with fathers that saying, look, I've been pro-life all my life, but I have two daughters and I just cannot sign this off, knowing that someday this might be an issue for them. All right. Those are the hard lines. What we saw in the data was, even though, abortion was an 8% issue for our, affordability might be 40% of people care about that, and abortion might be 8%. The numbers are hugely different, but it is a line they won't cross. So that's what's really, really important, is that you can come up with, you can get along maybe with the Republican Party in just about everything, but that is a line they just will not cross. Or they can get along with the Democrat Party and everything, but they won't cross another line. So we find that. And when you take those three social issues out, or if you call them social issues, I call them issues. If you take that out, you get a very interesting result in terms of when you start mapping people's alignment and then find what's common to their beliefs.
So part of the reason why, can I follow up real quick on that?
Go ahead.
Those all seem like they would be issues that favor Democrats. Are there similar lines that they won't cross that might favor Republicans?
Yeah, and there are some in that area, but they weren't nearly as let's say solid of a line. They were a little bit more space on where they could play in those lines, and it does come around on the taxes side. There's a little give there, but I guess it was really on the social issues, though, that I'd have to say overwhelmingly that those lines were drawn, and they were very hard lines. On the other side, we didn't see the hard lines as much. It's more of a shade of gray. It's how much government intervention or how little government intervention, how much tax, how little tax. And, I guess healthcare is one of those where you see a little bit more movement between not necessarily wanting a universal system at all, but some ability, especially in young voters. Why is my health plan just tied to one place I work? That's not how work works anymore. I want to take my health with me, be it private or whatever. But so there's a few of those issues that we do see on the right as well. But it does seem to be those three issues that probably most people would associate to the left. I think that's looking at it through the old lens of binary RFPs.
Sure. Yeah.
People look at newer generations of voters now; those aren't even issues really. Like,
They're just non-issues. Yeah.
It's just
So
not
what
an
I
issue.
just
So it's not
heard-
left or right to say it's not a Democrat issue
What I
anymore.
just
It's a
heard,
Yeah.
Vance
Ivy
Reavey
issue.
just said Democrats are stubborn jerks that you can't get along with, and conservatives are way more open-minded to conciliatory
I'm
behavior.
pretty sure he did not say
Vance
that when this
Reavey,
time.
Reavie.
You're gonna have me fired by tomorrow morning.
What about
That was interesting.
Yeah.
this is I wonder about this. Trump 2016, build the wall, right? This is a big thing. Build the wall, build the wall. A lot of people said he's speaking to his base. I actually think it had a broader appeal to the general public. If you interview most people, they want better immigration control. And I think that's only gotten more. That's gotten an even more popular issue. But I think that was a big part of him polling a lot of voters was appealing to independents' desires on the issue. Do you know anything about that? Any statistics, or what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any data from back in 2016, but I know there was a lot of, that was one of the reasons that, he was like a breath of fresh air on some of these things, I guess, at that time period. We know immigration is a big issue in this election, and I think you're right. I think our data shows that by far, independents don't want a free-for-all. No way. Everybody in the independents that we see, or the vast majority from our data, says that they want a program that is managed properly, that is safe, that is organized, that identifies, the right type, for economic migrants, business people migrating, or new, tech people in AI, or whatever it is, like a program that manages that, a program to manage families who come in, a program to manage refugees. And there's lots of examples around the world where these programs do work. So independents very much want to see a working immigration program, not a free-for-all. So that might be one of those lines, we say there's a hard line on the left for those other ones. Maybe that's a hard line on the right, that they do want a proper immigration program. We also see that merit, accountability, transparency, those matter enormously to independents. And I think that's something, again, on immigration, like some transparency on what's going on here it would be really important to them.
Interesting.
I mean, that's interesting. A lot of these hard lines you just talked about, they're kind of mostly areas where we find less common ground on the podcast, because they are kind of hard lines between liberal and conservative, but not all of them. I mean, we found common ground on many of these, but it tracks from my experience with Ryan. That's interesting.
So I'll throw out another word on that, because in the data work we did, in the modeling work we did on the data, we found two words and I've used one of them a lot already. Choice was very important. The other one we found overwhelmingly popular in the independents that we've been modeling on is tolerance. And we talk a lot about compromise, and we're always talking bipartisan compromises, all that sort of stuff. This was a really interesting one when we started seeing it turn up again and again in the studies that we did, was tolerance. And it doesn't mean you and I have to agree. We might agree in 80% of things, but I'm going to be tolerant of the stuff that I don't agree with you on, and you're going to be tolerant of the stuff that you don't agree with me on. And that's fine. We can live with each other. We can still be great friends. We can have a beer together. We can be neighbors. We can do all these things. We just have to show a little tolerance on some of the things that we're going to agree to disagree on, because overwhelmingly we agree on everything else. That to me is wow, positive. I mean, it should be so obvious, but when you think about how divided we are as a nation right now, if we can say that, what, let's remember it's just some tolerance. I mean, we all kind of practice that in our day anyhow, in so many different ways. For some reason, we've forgotten how to practice that at the political level, at the policy level. So we have to bring that back and understand that most people, probably the majority of us, or I would hope the majority of us, do believe that we should be tolerant. We don't all have to be 100% agree with everything all the time.
That's one of the reasons we started the podcast, right? Things are so polarized, and people just hate anybody on the other side. And I love my brother, and he's a flaming liberal, right? There was obviously something wrong. There's a disconnect.
Who knows,
So I love that. I love that. That's what the plurality of people are actually. The buzzword that's ringing for them is tolerance. That's interesting. I love that. That gives me hope. I like that.
It does to me too. I mean, I look at this and I think, if you think of choices and tolerance, let's be tolerant of other people's choices and let's give people choices. Gee, how empowering is that?
Hard to disagree with that.
Well, how normal is that, right? That's just like
it doesn't seem wrong that we have to talk about this as something special,
right.
doesn't it? We shouldn't even have to do that. And just
He
bizarre.
sounds like a normal human being, huh? I'll vote for him.
I'm
Yeah.
immediately suspicious then, right?
Right. But
The
we do know there's intolerance on both extremes. I think that's the real
right.
concern, right? That
No,
on
that's what I'm
both
saying.
extremes. Yeah.
You
So
get in the
most people in the
middle, and it's
middle,
like,
yeah, sure,
yeah,
obviously. Yeah.
And I think maybe that's why so many people tune out. They don't feel their
Mhm.
voices because we've got the extremes that are capturing more of the media attention and certainly social media attention. It just feels like you're being screamed at all the time by someone. You kind of recede back and think maybe you're the weird one that is tolerant but don't want to say anything. I don't know. Maybe that's part of it.
Yeah.
Do you see any data to indicate that the media or I mean Ryan might roll his eyes here, but the media is trying to move people to those extremes and they're not giving a voice to independents, like RFK, for example. He's a good example of this just happening, but
Yeah, I think, I know from the independents that contact us that are trying to do state and local races and stuff like that. And we don't get involved in it. We're C3, so we're not involved in any of them in that way. But they're frustrated by not being able to get into any of these spaces. They're just not being able to get into some of them occasionally would get a profile done here and there. They're almost like, oh, this is the oddity. Let's go look at that and sort of thing. But other than that, they do have a very hard time. And the media has to make money in what they do. They need clicks. And unfortunately, we seem to be a society that likes to click on things that are more extreme day by day, as opposed to what is not. It could be quite sensible. So it does seem to go that way. But interestingly enough, on that, when I was talking about analyzing the data through an independent lens, I mean, that's one of the challenges we have. If you think about building a model, say you're going to build a large language model or something, a machine learning model, we all talk about bias in AI, right? And that's a big problem and a big concern. And we've seen great examples of that where there's racial bias, there's all kinds of bias in some of these models. Well, if you're building a model and the only data source you have is all right-wing media or all left-wing media or Democrat media or Republican media, then that's what your model is biased to understand. So you're not actually able to produce insights that are more broad to the broader group, or that might take into account independence or even commonalities with the other side that's your sworn enemy, right? So when we talk about bias, that was something that really concerned me right away. Is why the Independent Center was important to me. It was like, we have to start understanding what's being written about policies and politics in our media from an independent angle, not starting from the R angle or the D angle. As you guys know, in any of these things, if you're going to train something, you train something to know what's right. And if you don't train it what's wrong, it doesn't know what right is. Think about training you might have kids, they got to know what's wrong and what's right. It's the same thing in this. We have to know what's wrong and what's right. We have to have both of those sides in order to understand it. So if you're leaving out that chunk of data, you're ending up with a very biased result. Now, then you think about how ChatGPT is coming into these things and everyone's using these tools to help them write articles and deliver, personalized messages that you get from candidates, which are all done, through some sort of using AI to help write all that. Well, if the model is trained on just that, then that's the only view that you're going to get. And that's the only language you're going to get, which is really starting to diminish the debate and diminish the conversation we can have, which then leads to intolerance.
What all right, anything else that you'd like it's worth noting about independent voters that you want to say, Vance?
I think we've got an exciting future ahead of us. Watch out what's coming, and we really like to hear more from independent-minded, independent thinkers, independent voters out there to raise their voices, bring their opinions forward. Get involved. Talk about being an independent voter. Talk about the issues you like from both sides. Let's get out there. Let's also start supporting the candidates that are talking about being bipartisan or working across, reaching across the aisle. Our data again and again shows overwhelmingly Americans want candidates who will reach across the aisle. All right, let's start rewarding those ones that do, because right now a lot of them do good work in this space and they don't get any media. They're not the ones freaking out and doing stuff on social media that gets all the attention. They need the attention because the only way they're going to get elected again or get any attention or get on good committees, stuff like that, is knowing the public is actually interested in supporting them. So we have to reward the ones that are being sensible and trying to reach across the aisle and come up with, the compromises, I guess, that we need to move forward.
that just seems like such a catch-22 though, because you need to be sensational to get the headlines. But I just want to vote for a normal guy.
I know.
Politics should be boring, right?
Yeah,
should be-
exactly,
It should be
exactly.
really boring.
Yes, they should be. Okay, sorry. I know I said it. That was the last thing, but we're gonna move on. But I do. So, do you think we'll ever get to a, because this independent demographic is growing, right? And it's like, do you predict that we will get to a point where it just can't be ignored, and a third party sort of has to come in to fill this void? It's inevitably will come in and fill that void. Do you predict that at all?
I think so. I think that I think it will happen. I think the demographics and the generational changes that are happening. I think the way we get information from so many different sources now is encouraging on this as well. Our change in how we absorb, where we get our media from, is changing so much. I think this will happen, whether it's a third party or several third parties. Who knows what it'll be? I mean, we've seen examples in other countries where they get sometimes regional based parties or different groups that support from different types of demographics and things. I think there's an interesting opportunity from all that. So I think we're going to see more and more of it, only because the frustration with what we're getting now.
Yeah.
I think no matter who wins this round, we're gonna go through a cycle of enormous frustration again. Well, how many more times are we just going to go through this enormous frustration before someone finally goes, you know what, I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to vote for an independent.
Well, it was Utah 2016 that it was, Hillary Clinton and Trump. And Utah is the most conservative state in the union. It was always going to vote for Trump, but he was very unpalatable for most of the demographic. And so you had there was a third party candidate,
McMuffin.
Evan McMullen, and he got 20% of the
voted for him.
vote. It was a big, I mean, that was one of the biggest three-way races that we've seen in the last few decades. I was very happy about that. I was very happy that he was who I voted for him. I was very happy. It was very encouraging to me, right? And then he's gone, and then nothing's happened since, which has been really sad.
And it turned out he was a total douchebag too. But
can happen to anyone, even if they're an independent, right? Let me pose this to you. It seems like it's an impossibility for an independent to make a difference, or to independent to take the stage here and actually change things. But look at what happened in 2022 with that close of the Congress being that close, the Senate being that close. It would have taken one or two independent senators, and they'd held the balance of power. 5 Congress people would have held the balance of power in the House. That would have changed everything, because both the Democrats and the Republicans would have had to negotiate with that group to decide who's the speaker.
Who has a lot of power.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a crazy goal of saying we're going to change the presidency, or we're going to be the independent party is going to be the biggest party. This is saying, geez, if we could get 1 or 2 senators in, or maybe 5 congressional representatives in, we've just changed everything.
Yeah.
Pretty fair.
Like, I was pretty young when Ross Perot ran, but people are still scarred going, oh, well, Ross Perot just lost us the election and gave it to Bill Clinton. Or I think that's another hurdle. But
and the Green Party has done it. The Green Party did it to Al Gore, I think it was. That was one of the yeah.
So Vance, I love what you're talking about, Vance. How do our listeners follow the Independent Center? Do you have Facebook?
We're on X, Facebook. Go to our website, independentcenter.org, and you can sign up to get on our mailing list. You get all our polls, all our articles, opportunities to be in our focus groups, events that we do. We're growing, so we want people to tell us what they want us to do, want us to chase, issues they care about that they want us to look into and advocate on their behalf. So we're a movement. We're not a party. We're a movement, and we rely on the grassroots. I mean, we want to make policy, yes, but we want the policy to be from the public, what they want, the direction they want to go, tied together in the way they want to see it happen. We're not doing this top down. I mean, I come from a retail brand product background, so when you're coming up with a new product, you don't just invent it and then go shove it down people's throats. You go ask them what flavors, colors, features, all that sort of stuff they want, right? So that's what we're doing right now. What flavors, colors, features, everything that these independent voters want. All right, then let's go figure out some policies that we can start building towards.
Awesome.
So yes, join us. And on Twitter, it's independent_sen, and Independent Center, the Independent Center on Facebook. But yeah, go to the website and you'll get all the information.
Very cool. Okay, so you're cool to stick around. We've got another topic.
Yes.
Awesome. Tommy, you want to introduce our next topic?
Yeah, let's talk about it. So I want to talk about basically fraud in academia, mainly like research publications, things we're seeing. So I grabbed an article, and it's a little older, but a few months. It was, and the title kind of says it all: why scientific fraud is suddenly everywhere. And I go into this, but what's really kicked it off for me, I'll just touch on it. There's two big stories that were kind of over the last year and a half that have gone off. They're two big, I guess, individuals. One, it's in this article, but it's Mark Tessier-Lavigne. So he's the president of Stanford University. He stepped down. This was a while ago. He stepped down due to he was accused of fraud in some of his research papers that he had published before he became president. There was an independent probe that basically said, okay, we didn't manipulate it, but it was wrong, right? It was inaccurate. And so, and then the other big one is Francesco Gino. She's not in this article, but that was a big one. She's a Harvard behavioral scientist who did a bunch of like happiness studies, and her big four research papers. There was some research done. Yeah, they were all retracted. There's a bunch of weird, obvious manipulation of data. In fact, I looked into this quite a bit, and it was like really dumbly done, right? It was like you would do, if you just like unsorted it with a different column, like by dates or something like that, you could see all the rows that they just like put in some numbers in, and then they resorted it so that they were scrambled. It's like pretty obviously done. And so the news that came out was that Harvard did this big independent review. They're like, no, they cited her that she had manipulated the data. She sued Harvard for defamation, but the suit was just dismissed, and that just happened a few days ago, saying, sorry, no, that there's nothing to this. So what I want to talk about was like, there's a lot of problems in academic publications, and this. This paper talks about it a lot. And one of the big things they said was, okay, last week, scientific publisher Wiley decided to shutter 19 scientific journals after retracting 11,300 sham papers.
Wow.
There's a large-scale industry of so-called paper mills that sell fictive research, sometimes written by artificial intelligence. To researchers who then publish it in the peer-reviewed journals. So this is a big, which are sometimes edited by people who have been placed by those sham groups. So there's like this big industry of producing literature that's basically has an agenda in a way, or
it's not quite an agenda. We can talk about that though.
Yeah, absolutely an agenda.
Not these. This is just getting published. Yeah, they don't care about the content. It's literally just about getting published. So we'll talk about that. It's less about an agenda. So.
Well, yes, and what they do cite in the article is we have a broken incentive structure, right? Yep. And I think that's what Ryan's talking about. Is like people want to get published. They cite high school students paying journals to publish their work just so that they're published, right? So that they can get accepted to a college. It's just a really bad incentive structure that's just people getting published.
So
is just what they want to
keep their jobs.
They're to get tenured, I guess. To
get tenure.
The performance incentives are volume, right?
Yeah.
Ryan, whose house are you living in right now?
My house?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean the professor who I replaced?
Yep. She didn't have tenure. Ryan took her house and her job.
Yeah, she was denied tenure and I took her job. And then I bought her house. But I didn't know that. I genuinely did not know. She knew, but I had no idea. I just happened to get both. So
it's a cutthroat business.
Congratulations.
Pretty low, Ryan.
Congratulations. If I had only known. Yeah. So
you would have paid even less for the house because
I would have. Yeah, probably.
I took advantage of the
Did you hear about the guy who sold his house and he sold it and then he found out later he sold it to Jeff Bezos and he had discounted it and he was like, son of a bee. I'm gonna charge full price.
Oh geez, that's crazy. Okay, so
topic, that's for sure. I was at the National Science Foundation conference back in January, and one of the presenters was talking exactly about this issue. And had I known I was going to talk to you guys today, I would have listened a little more attentively to him presentation. And now I kind of wish I would have, but it was exactly that, talking about he had some charts up there just showing the volume of papers produced and how much it is now compared to 10, 20 years ago. And the impossibility of fact checking it all. there are AI tools now that they're developing to start going over these, to start looking for this. But yeah, it was just amazing the numbers he was putting up there and how big of a problem this is. And that's exactly what he said. The incentive structure is wrong and
Yep.
causes some of this. And it made me, I was talking to some friends recently and they were talking about teaching and how this, AI is changing it so much. And some of them have gone back to oral exams because they can't trust the written.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
No, there are all sorts of issues.
And I didn't really conclude, but like one of the results of this is we're having a huge replication crisis, right? Of like these studies are, basically concluding something and it cannot be replicated. And I can't, we talked about this a while back, a year or two back, Ryan, and I thought it was like 50% of all studies cannot be we can't successfully reproduce them. It might even be higher than that. I don't know.
It depends on the discipline, but some disciplines it's as high as 70 to 80% cannot be replicated.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So it actually, if you read, I kind of went down a deep dive because this is like right up my alley, right?
Yes.
I've published lots of scientific articles. I'm more proud about the fact that I've never had anything retracted than I am about the number, right? I've never been accused of fraud. I will back up anything that I've done. I'll give you the data. I'll give you the R code, right? I'll give you all of that because I'm not lying, right? I'm not fudging my data and I'm perfectly open about that. So yeah, I've published lots of stuff, but I care less about that than the fact that I'm doing honest research. But I talk about this all the time. Predatory publishers have been a major issue for at least 20 years. And that's where it's less the paper mill, right? This is a little bit different. This is where if you just pay them, they'll publish your trash.
Yeah.
This is a major issue. I've caught people at my university doing it because I sit on the tenure and promotion committee, and I've literally had to go to some of my faculty members and say, we are not going to accept this because this was a pay for publication, right? It was
How
predatory.
did you know?
So complicated, right? One, I'm trying to do my due diligence as a member of kind of the committee that's evaluating them. So I will read their publications. The one that comes to mind, I'm not naming names, of course, right? So I'm not going to name names, but they had a list of like 4 or 5 articles, which is not very many, but I will always pick at least one of them to read just to be like, okay, let's see what it is they're actually writing. And it turned out it's a different discipline, but it's a statistical technique that I've actually done a lot of work on. It was scale development, right? I happen to have published papers on scale development. So this is something that I know a lot about. So I'm like, oh, I'm totally going to read this. And so I get in, I'm probably 2 paragraphs in and I'm like, this is trash. Everything they've done is statistically wrong, right? Like it's all bad. The writing is terrible. There are blatant grammar and spelling mistakes. Like everything is wrong about this paper. And so 2 paragraphs in, I'm like, who published this? And that's when I went and looked up the article, looked up the journal, and there are lists. It's tricky because the person who originally had a list, he was a librarian in Colorado, right? And he got sued by one of these big predatory publishers and he had to take his list down. So now there are like, I don't know, kind of incognito lists that you can find of predatory publishers. So they're out there, they're a little trickier to find, but you can still find them. And it's not hard to catch like, oh, wow, yeah, this is total trash. So yeah.
So you only check one of like the 5 papers that they put on the resume?
I mean, I don't read all of them, right? So I'm not going to read. I mean, I have some colleagues.
So it could have been
who
5 trash papers on that guy's CV.
No, on that one, because one of them was trash, I looked at all of them, right?
Okay.
So typically, what I'll do is if they've got 7 publications, right? I'll pull one, I'll read it. It looks fine. I'm like, all right, this is good, right? I'm not concerned about them. They're doing legitimate research. On that one, I pulled the one and I was like, oh my gosh, this is terrible.
Okay,
and then I looked at the others and 2 of them were in like bottom. I hate to rank journals, right? But they were like the bottom tier of acceptable journals. One was in a magazine that wasn't peer reviewed. So I'm like, we're not counting that as peer reviewed. And then the other one was actually in a predatory journal. So I gave them credit for 2 pretty low tier articles and not the magazine article. And I was like, I don't know that this person deserves tenure. So I was the vote against in that particular case, right? And again, like I'm not naming names.
Everybody else voted for?
It was a split decision.
Oh my goodness. See, this is the problem with the whole peer review process and tenure and stuff. Like you just admitted if the one by chance was a good article or a good paper, he probably wouldn't have looked at the other. So he could have had 6 out of the 7 could have been garbage if you had just looked at the good one and the guy gets tenure.
Yeah.
Like That's scary to me. These are the professionals that we're trusting everything to. I mean,
Well,
I have way bigger problems with peer review than just that, but that
I
right
know.
there is kind of shocking to
Well,
me.
let me give you another. I'm going to totally trash on science here for a second, right? Even though I'm a scientist and this is literally what I do, but I just reviewed a book proposal today for a major press, right? So this is a major press. They sent me this. I read it over the weekend, and then I finally wrote up the review. And I wrote a pretty scathing review of that book. I think it's terrible. I pointed out
Did
a
it make
number
the
of
cover?
just I pointed out a number of factual inaccuracies. I didn't think that it made any sense. The structure, the content was bad. Like there were all sorts of issues. I've done this before, and the press has still accepted the book for publication.
Right. Right.
Okay. So it blows my mind, right? There is, you can actually see it on my Vita. There is a journal that is in the margins. Some people think that it's actually acceptable. I think it's predatory. I reviewed an article for him once, gave pretty reasonable feedback, expecting revisions. And when the author wrote back, they said, I'm not going to make any of those revisions because it's too hard. And I was like, that's not how this works, right? Like, that's totally unacceptable. And the editor, so I wrote back to the editor and I was
With
like,
a
yeah,
review.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
So I wrote back to the editor and I was like, what are you going to do? Because I'm actually an expert in this area. And they're just saying I'm not going to do it. And they're like, well, they don't have to do it. And I was like, I will never review for you ever again. You are a predatory journal. And that is on my Vita. So it literally says on my Vita, I will never review for this journal or any journals that are published by this publisher ever again. Fuck those guys because they're predatory journals, right? I will
So
not do that.
They're just
The
getting
family
rid
show,
of the,
Ryan.
yeah,
I know, sorry.
They're just getting rid of
I
the
get
peer
angry about
part
this.
of peer review.
Yeah, pretty much. Right.
Nice.
Well, so is it safe to say, because like I think this is contributing to an issue, a crisis in credibility, right? With academic
Mhm.
research. And which I think is contributing to a larger crisis in credibility of our institutions, right?
Yeah.
Of our government, our you know, our
banks, our
higher
Congress,
education.
everybody.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah, right.
everything. Yeah.
There's
Our podcasts.
well, so there is and there's a little bit of a tangent, but the unemployment non-farms payroll report comes out this Friday. It has come out and been suspiciously high, meaning the jobs reports have been high, meaning lots of jobs, low unemployment. And even Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, was like, what do you call it? He's like, yes, we believe there are overstated numbers. He's like, so he's even admitting, he's like, I don't know if I believe these as much. And these are government reports. And so there's a lot of people saying right before an election, there's no way we're going to give a bad jobs report, even if it is, right? And you're like, this is this erosion of trust, right? Like can we even trust what's going on here, right? And this issue I think is going on, and it seems like there's just rampant issues within academic research, and this is like contributing to it. Like there's a problem, right? Like what can we even trust?
Well, so I did crap on scientific research here for a minute, but I want to then turn around and defend it. The beauty of scientific research is that it's often self-correcting. Okay. So what I mean by that is if garbage gets published, then other researchers can go and say, hold on, that's not what I'm finding. And then you can actually publish your own. And eventually the good research will rise up, right? Mm-hmm. So this is an area where you can self-correct. And I think that's one of the best selling points of scientific research is that it does self-correct over time. So I've been involved in a lot of this where I see something that I think is garbage. I'm about to talk about one of these papers in 2 weeks at a conference where I'm going to call out like one of the leading journals in my field for publishing something that I think is terrible. And I'm going to say, this should be retracted. This is how bad this article is. It is a self-correcting discipline. There are problems. It's not perfect, but it is self-correcting.
Well, I'm pleased to know it's self-correcting, but if I take it back to the institution, like the jobs report, by the time it's corrected, does it matter anymore to the general population? It matters within that community very much. But that's one way on the jobs, just to use that one. Mm-hmm. Okay, we admit they bring it out and they say, yeah, there's probably some over or under, some honesty in saying that at least. And then it does get corrected later on, and sometimes that makes the news, sometimes it doesn't. And it's like, I almost want to trust institutions that actually tell me, well, this is the data we've got. It's probably actually a little off. It's going to move a little bit. Great. I can find that a more honest argument to make, and then I'm actually interested and more likely to believe it when it does come out with the corrections, right? Because I've been warned ahead of time. Whereas if it's come out and said, and then it's proven wrong later on, but that's within the community, that makes me not want to trust that institution because I'm not sure I can trust them. I'm not sure I ever find out what the real answer was. So I could really see that being a big problem.
Yeah, that's a totally fair point. I'm not gonna challenge that at all, right? Like,
I don't have any solutions or ways of thinking about how to fix that, but that's exactly like the corrections are made largely visible within the community.
Yep, that's how it works, right? So all of those like retractions, it's the subscribers to the journals who find out about the retractions. It's not when it made a big splash, right? So that researcher you were talking about at Harvard, she had a bunch of her research get like national attention, national press. Like it was a big deal. Nobody's paying attention to the retractions. The one that I cite with my students all the time, because I'm really serious about like what I do. I don't know if you guys remember the study where they said if you use smaller plates, you'll actually eat less food. Right? I don't know if you saw this. That paper was retracted.
Wow.
Really?
Not true. That there's no evidence to support that.
Yeah.
That was actually retracted, right?
But we never heard about that.
You never heard about the retraction.
Suffering with these small plate meals.
Yeah.
And I haven't lost any weight for it, so that no wonder.
I'll be right back. I'm gonna go break the dishes.
I'm gonna go get myself a great big.
No, that's a great point, Ryan.
Yeah. So they make national attention.
Is in the debate when Kamala said Trump called for a bloodbath, right? We all know that I mean, you guys have talked about it on the podcast. That has been debunked, but it didn't matter because it's already going to get out there. And if it's retracted later and some little, 8th page of the newspaper, nobody sees it, right?
That's it. I mean, does anyone jump into the newspaper or online or offline and go right straight to the retractions and apologies?
Right. Page 18.
So misspelled their name and had the wrong decimal point. People pay attention.
Let me
Ryan.
Go ahead, Tom.
So Ryan, I was going to challenge you on that, the self-correction, because I really want to know if you have faith in that, because you said you wrote, you even gave feedback on an article and was like, hey, or on a
book and article. Book. Yeah, it's happened multiple times. Yeah.
But you've been kind of like, they just kind of plowed on and moved forward. And I was going to bring up that with the Francisco Gino case, there was people that it got brought up. They're like, hey, there's some problems here. And they were initially ignored. And I think it got escalated through some other route to the dean. And then he actually took it seriously, started the probe, and then it actually kind of like came about. And there were whistleblowers that were sort of just getting mulled over and blown off. And I don't know how widespread that is, right? Is that happening all the time? And people are like, no, I got the cash, we're publishing or do you think there's enough of that movement there? Or do you think there's gonna be a backlash, right, eventually?
Can I further pile on here? Since we're piling on Ryan.
You're killing me here.
I want to pile on. I brought this up years ago on the podcast. One of the things that has happened repeatedly on the podcast is I'll make a statement and Ryan will go, show me the peer-reviewed data, or I won't believe it. And it drives me crazy.
I know.
And I understand, I really do understand why Ryan says that, because peer review,
right?
I'm going to hold my nose and say this, peer review is probably the best source of truth, but there's so many problems with it. And I brought this up years ago in 2018, Peter Boghossian, Ryan knows this guy, and his two buddies, they saw the problems with peer review. They decided over a year to publish the craziest things they could. They submitted 20 crazy articles or crazy papers for publication over 1 year period. And after the year, 7 of them were accepted. 7 of them were accepted but hadn't been printed yet. And then only 6 of them were rejected. Okay. And they were just nuts. There was no methodology. One of them, just to give you an idea, this is my favorite one. It was Mein Kampf. They just took Mein Kampf and they took out the word Jew and put in the word white person. And then they just submitted it. It was straight up plagiarism of Mein Kampf, and that was accepted. That was published.
I've got this article up right here of those cases. Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely absurd. And they had, like, you should just go read the ones that got accepted. And
they're crazy.
They're crazy, but they were all of a this intersectional bent. They were all leading towards this postmodernism thing.
Yes.
And so when Ryan said that there is no bias or what was the word you used?
Bias. Certainly there's bias in academic publishing. I'm not going to say there isn't.
Well, you used the word. There was no, I forgot what you said right at the beginning of this. You're saying these are just paper mills that people are trying to get published, but they're clearly
agendas.
Thank you.
I see.
Why.
Okay, yeah.
So they're clearly in certain disciplines.
In certain disciplines, yes, I'll concede that. Yeah.
In certain disciplines, there's clearly an agenda because everything that they got published, these papers are crazy. They were all postmodernist.
It fit with the theme that they were trying. The diet.
And the crazy thing, this is to back up this self correcting thing. The person that caught on to what they were doing, it was a Twitter account of a guy who was really critical of peer review articles. And he's the one that saw, like, oh, we got some really crazy stuff from these. It was aliases of Peter Boghossian.
They were all made up. Yeah.
Made up. So he caught on. These researchers are publishing absolute garbage. He called it out, not the industry, not the peers that were supposed to be reviewing it. It was a guy that doesn't like peer review.
Yeah, it was an outsider.
So that's why this peer review process is so problematic.
But Josh, here's the thing. We're finding common ground. You just said it. It's the best we have, but it's not perfect by any stretch.
But
I totally agree with that.
It has rankled me for years when you say, show me the peer-reviewed articles. I won't believe you.
What else am I going to do?
Right.
There's nothing better.
No, I got to share the other two. So this article talked about three of them. The one was the Mein Kampf. The other one was from the Journal of Feminist Geography. Parsed human reactions to rape culture and queer performivity at dog parks.
Yes, I remember that one.
And then the other one was
I love Vance's face here. He's like, what are you talking about?
You have to explain what it was. You have to explain what they said.
A 2-year study involving thematic analysis of table dialogue to uncover the mystery of why heterosexual men like to eat at Hooters, right? And so,
I'm sorry, but was there a 2-year study required for that?
No. They made it all up.
Yeah, they made up all of it. Okay, but the dog park one, their assertion was they would watch dogs raping other dogs, and if it was a male dog raping another male dog, the owners would intercede. But if it was a male dog raping a female dog, they would laugh. So therefore, the owners are sexist or like something just bizarre. Absolutely bizarre.
Fairly big logic jumps there. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes. Oh yeah, and it was all intentional. Okay, so if we're recalling like the big question,
I thought politics was interesting, but man, this
yeah,
welcome
whole
to
new
the
world
podcast.
So yeah, there are definitely problems. I'm going to reveal one other thing. Like the way that peer review works, I'm not supposed to like name things, but I am in a situation right now where I was just asked to review an article for the top 3 journal in the world, right? So they're the number 1 and number 2 are Science and Nature, right? Those are always consistently number 1 and number 2.
Playboy?
Yeah. Not peer reviewed, but I know you read it, Josh.
Or the articles.
Just the articles.
Yeah,
just the peer review articles.
So I'm not going to name names. Again, I've got to be really careful because of the way that peer review works. But I was asked to review an article. The article, like the data were fine. The analyses were fine. The interpretation was wildly incorrect. I mean, like way, way off. They were going way beyond. Oh yeah, for sure. Right. They were going beyond what their results actually allowed them to say. And so I pointed that out and said, like, look, I'm fine if they publish this based on the data and the analyses, but they have to rework the whole paper about what they're trying to say because they're going way beyond the actual results that they have. I probably shouldn't say even this, right? I'm probably saying too much, but I took my review and I sent it to a colleague of mine who happens to work in the same area and said, can you believe that I had to review this? Because, and I wasn't, I didn't pull any punches. I was like, this is apologetics, right? That's basically what it was. I do religion stuff. So I was like, this is really, really bad. And I said that to the journal, like, you cannot publish this as is. It's got major problems. I sent it to a friend who does the exact same research. And he says, you will not believe this. He's like, 1, you were nice, right? But 2, I read an article by the exact same authors today for a different journal, and they did the exact same thing.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So they're out there trying to do this. And here's the problem. And I've already said, like, this is what's going to happen. When the editor wrote me to say, will you review this? He said, this is an invited submission. That's really rare, right? To get an invited submission to a top journal. And it's because one of the primary authors of this is at an Ivy League, and so is the editor, right? So when I say, is there bias? Okay, so they're both at the same university. It's an Ivy League university. I'm not going to name names. I'm trying to say this, right? But basically,
therefore, they're trying to get a third party because
no. They're trying to get me to review it, right?
Right.
But basically, the editor reached out to his buddy, right, who's at the same university, and said, "Hey, submit an article to my journal that I edit." No conflict of interest there, right? Like major conflict of interest. So somehow the editor told me, this is an invited article, would like you to review it. And I'm like, well, I don't know why you told me it's invited, but now I'm going to be extra critical. And I didn't even have to be extra critical, but they'd done the same thing somewhere else. So I told my wife about this. She's also an academic. I told her, I read her some of the major flaws with the article. And I've basically committed that if they try and override my review and let them publish as is, I'm going full whistleblower on this. I will full on go out and say, here's what I got originally. Here's what my review was. Here are the problems. No one is going to disagree that these are problems, right? And I'm going to
call out the conflict of interest.
I will 100% call it the conflict of interest. And I talk to journalists all the time. I guarantee I can find a journalist who would take this story up and say, we have a problem, right? This is a very serious problem. And this is top 3 journal in the world. Wow. We have issues, right? So I would like to think that they're going to take my review seriously and they're going to make them fix the problems, but we'll find out.
I mean, this is just such an important issue in order to have trust. And, these are the things that are examples to younger students that are, coming up in the system. They can't trust this, or they see this sort of thing happen. You can just see why we have the problems we have. Shocking.
Yes. Wow. It's terrible.
That's why my skin crawls when Ryan demands peer review, because I mean, I get it. I get why he's asking for it. What other criteria do we have to find the truth, right? But the system is so full of holes and it's so agenda driven, and now it's back to the original article, it's job driven and money driven. How am I supposed to have trust in this particular system? So what I just heard from Ryan is
our well-being of all of us depend a lot of times on this research done at universities. To go to the commercial stream or into the public stream, whatever it is, whether it's NASA picking it up or whether it's a private company picking it up, it doesn't matter. But if this is the sort of research that's happening and some of the issues that are happening, then it does make you worried about what then happens next.
Yeah. No,
Ryan, do you think things are, it seems like things are getting worse, not better. What do you think?
So I can see how it would look that way. And I'm not necessarily going to say that it's not getting worse. AI is causing problems, right? Yeah. I have a good friend at my university, and Vance can jump in here because I know he's done a lot of work on AI, but I have a good friend at my university who's also an editor at a journal. I've edited a journal, right? I was editing my journal and I stopped right before, a couple of years before AI really came on the scene. He is still editing a journal, and he said the submissions to his journal when ChatGPT came out quadrupled almost overnight. Right?
Yeah, every industry we're seeing that, the proliferation of content being generated, not just in academia, but it is a huge problem.
Yeah. So the tricky part and why
a lot of inaccuracies in it. Yep.
Oh yeah, it's super problematic. So why I say I don't know that I think it's definitely just getting worse is we're at least now aware of the problem. Right? So we're aware of the problem. We're developing our own AI tools to fight the AI tools that are being used. And the fact that Wiley's shutting down journals, retracting papers, those are all good signs, right? That's the system actually working to say we're catching the crooks, we're catching the frauds. Does it mean we've solved the problem? No. And it may get worse before it gets better, but we're aware of a problem. Here's the really sad part. What really kicked the replication crisis off, it was more than a decade ago, was it was in a cancer research journal. So it was actually a big pharmaceutical company wrote a very small research note and said, hey, we are trying to monetize cancer treatments, right? This is what we do, is we monetize cancer treatments. So we read all of the latest research in cancer, and before we pursue a specific line of treatment, we replicate the studies. And we tried to replicate the top 20 studies in this journal over the last couple of years, and we were only able to replicate about 20% of them. there's a problem, right?
Yeah.
And that was it. It was like a one-page little piece by a pharmaceutical company saying, we can't replicate a lot of
We
the
don't
leading
trust
research here.
jack squat.
This is where it gets interesting. You can have AI write these articles, but yeah, if you can't replicate it, then you've been able to prove the issue. So hopefully it will get better. And I think with where AI is going right now, it's generated the problem of, content's easy to write, but it is also part of the solution in that we're getting much smarter about how to use AI to analyze things. And I noticed in that article, you could do a search. You could do a search on exactly these words or this sentence. Okay, that's going to find out if someone's plagiarized, but we're getting much better with AI being able to use it to understand a theme or a topic, understand similarities, to grade, how close do you think this is to the original concept in this article? Tell us out of 10, 9, it's 9 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 or 7 out of 10. It's getting smarter and smarter at being able to make that sort of judgment, or at least assist us in making the judgment, because I do believe that AI, doesn't do judgment, but I think the tools are going to help us on this, but it's still the incentive structure is wrong, right?
Yeah. So we haven't really talked about the incentive structure. We probably should if you want to go down that path. But did you want to go down that path or no?
Well, yeah, but I was gonna say, yeah. I think it was Vance said like that this is permeating every industry everywhere. And what was I gonna say? The Amazon reviews, right? Like, or just reviews in general, product reviews has been a huge thing for years, right? Like what's actually real, what's a bot. And I know X has been, they talk about this a lot. Elon Musk talks about this, but I'm sure every social media platform of like bot posts, right? Of like, what's a bot? Who's a Russian troll, right? And who's actually a real human, and distinguishing between the two, and his efforts to try to fix it, right? And they're different, different technologies they're trying to implement. And so like, yes, but I am concerned, like I said, trust in the system, right? The system in general, I think, is at an all-time low and continuing to decline. And I'm like, are we going to be like, as a society, are we going to be able to pull out of this quickly enough before it all goes to crap? That's like, trust, like right now, like everyone already knows when the election, whoever wins the election, there's already going to be like, this was real, this was not, this was fraud, right? We already know that's going to come. And it's like, and everyone's like, are we going to be strong enough? Are we going to be able to survive it? Right. They're like, we already know, like, this is right around the corner. So it's concerning, right? It's all concerning.
I saw a study, I don't know, it was quite a few years ago, but it was looking at like the Russian propaganda issue in Europe. And they were talking about how it had less impact than it has had in past cycles in the United States in the election. And they were saying simply because they've had to deal with it for a lot longer. And so they've built into their education approach the tools to help people, when they're, I don't know if it's in school or university or whatever level, but to help them see through this better, to educate them to understand these things better, and educate them to read through things in a different way, or just approach it in a different way, so that they're not getting fooled by these bots and trolls and things like that. And I thought, well, that was kind of a really interesting thought. It made me kind of back up and go, we probably have to start thinking about how we reform a lot of these different sectors, a lot of like education and all these different areas, to think about, well, what skills are we teaching people to have? Because if AI can do this much of what we need to do, and we're moved into a different role, of a value add role of a different kind, we need to teach to that role, not the creation of content role, but the judgment and reviewing, something like that. Like, we probably have to change how we approach a lot of different things with how this technology has changed, how it can be accomplished, or the outcomes are accomplished.
Yeah, that's a very, very, very fair point. I mean, I'm increasingly using AI not to write my papers, right? But one of the things that I will do, I still write a lot. Sometimes I'll be writing things and like the references, the citations, they come to mind and I know them. But there are other times where I'm like, well, I know this is kind of true because I've read something about it, but I don't remember it. So I'm just going to put in brackets like citation, and I'll come back and get it later. And so what I'll now do is I'll just turn to ChatGPT and I'll like, can you give me a citation that talks about this? And it'll give it to me, and then I'll go check it. I never take ChatGPT's word for it, because 90% of the time now it's actually accurate. So I'll check and verify, but 10% of the time it gives me fake citations. And I'm like, well, missed that one, right? But it's on things that are like on the edges of my knowledge, where I'm like, I kind of have read stuff about this, but it's not right in my core knowledge area where I really know the literature. So I'm using it for things like that. I use it sometimes to summarize articles like, again, that are relevant to what I'm reading, but not core. The core stuff, I have to read that, right? But the stuff that's like, no, it's kind of about this, but not really. I'll ask it to give me, a 500-word summary of the article. And so I use it, but I'm not using it to do the core things that I need to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's changing everything. AI is changing everything.
Trust but verify.
That's actually a really good example of how I think human AI interaction should be. And that is your time best used going to find that citation, or
No, it's not.
go to find it and then review it, use that human power of judgment and nuance and understanding to then go, yes, it is applicable. I'm going to use it in this way. That's where we have our special role. But yeah, is our time best used going to find it and the hours wasted trolling through papers to find it? I don't think so.
No.
Or is your time best used stockpiling weapons? Because we've all seen Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and
Josh,
Skynet is clearly going to take over. So while you guys are catering to ChatGPT and contributing to the problem, come to my house when Skynet takes over, and I'll have you covered.
So Josh is actually 20 feet below ground in his bunker right now. And
Don't
disclose location.
on the location because it'll ruin it.
I'm living in my in-laws' basement because my house burned down. Shut up.
Yes, it did.
Bunker.
Yeah.
Which is actually true, but we give him a hard time about it anyway.
Yeah, we give Josh a pass on his the messy background, right? His house burned down
not exactly professional with bikes and boxes in the back, but
all right, Ryan, I want to talk about the incentive structure. Like,
there are two levels that we should probably talk about. Okay.
Go for it.
So the first level is the one that's kind of already been mentioned, is we do exist in largely a publisher perish system where, as academics, it's not true for all systems, but for most, you have to publish a certain amount of research in order to get tenure and then to get promoted and to kind of get your annual evaluations. You have to be publishing. So there's a built-in.
And what Vance said, it's more about volume than like a quantity than over quality. Is that true?
Well, not necessarily. It's kind of true, right? That you have to have a certain amount of volume, but some universities have now started to pay attention to the quality of the journal. So if you publish in a top tier journal, you could do one of those every 2 years and your university may be like, that's awesome. We don't care. Whereas if you're in like tier 2 journals, you may have to do one every year to compensate for the fact that you're not in the top tier journals. So some universities are aware of the different quality of publications.
There is some weighting.
So there is some weighting. Other universities don't care as much as long as it's legitimate peer reviewed. And then there are other universities that don't even understand legitimate peer review. And I'm not going to like parcel out which ones are which, but like that's absolutely true. Sorry, Josh.
That's such a terrible thing to even contemplate. Some universities don't even understand peer review, but they're universities where we educate our children.
Sorry. Do you not want me to tell the truth?
No,
I appreciate your honesty.
It's just terrifying.
It is terrifying. So there is that incentive structure, and I toy with at times, like, how could we fix that, right? Because we do need to incentivize people to do research. And really what I'm getting at is like, we have a tenure system where it's up or out, right? So you either have to get tenured or you leave. But then where the problem becomes is like, you get tenure, then what's the continued incentive to continue to do research? And we have, like, even at my own university, right? We have faculty who did just enough to get tenure. Have they produced anything since? Right. So there are problems there. And I don't have the answer. I'm just saying, like, that's one of the problematic incentive structures. There's a second one that often doesn't get mentioned, and that's that the whole peer review process relies upon the goodwill of researchers like me. Okay. When I do peer reviews, I don't get published for that. I don't get paid for that. Right. So, some publisher, let's say it's Wiley, that's the one that's in there. I've reviewed probably dozens of articles, if not hundreds of articles for Wiley journals over the years. And you know how much I've got paid for that? Nothing. Not a damn thing.
It doesn't count towards your credentialing at your university. I mean, you could do 10 peer reviews, but not do a paper, but those 10 reviews might be more valuable than you actually doing something.
They should be. At my university?
Yeah.
No, it would count for basically nothing.
Do you even get cited in the paper for reviewing it or anything like that?
Nope.
Wow.
So the best that they will do, and they don't even do this anymore. They used to when I started doing this back in the early 2000s, is at the end of the year, some journals would list the people who had reviewed for them as just one big list because it's supposed to be blind, right? So they're not supposed to tell you like who reviewed your article. So they would just have one big list at the end of the year and say, these are all the people who reviewed for us. And that's it, right?
But
Now there
that's
are
also
places.
problematic.
Yeah.
Because it could just be my buddy Steve, like in that university
Right.
example you were
Which has
giving.
happened.
He
Yep.
reviewed for me. So,
So there is this problem. And the other issue to it is like Wiley is a nonprofit, but some of these are owned by mega corporations that are making
Yeah.
billions of dollars a year.
It's a
Right.
huge problem.
Huge
right?
problem, right? It's such a problem. My wife is also an academic. She's published more peer-reviewed articles than I have, right? It's not that it's a competition, but she's winning. And here's
Not that we're keeping track.
Yeah, but we are, right?
it's a competition.
The numbers on that you want to share? No.
No. But she published an article once that she couldn't even get a copy of it. So she wrote the article, right? But she doesn't subscribe to the journal. So she submitted it to the journal. It got accepted. It got published. How we get access? Because I don't subscribe to the hundreds of journals that I review or read, right? My library at my university subscribes to those. So if my library doesn't subscribe to that particular journal, I have no way of getting access to it. So she's at a Research One university. They don't subscribe to the journal that she published in. She literally does not have a copy of the paper that she wrote.
And this is the best system we have?
It's terrible, Josh. I mean, think about it. It's even worse, right?
So
I'm writing this for free. Now, yes, it's tied to my job, but I then give it to a journal and I give them the copyright to what I wrote. They own what I wrote. And then they sell it back to my university, and my university pays them for what I wrote. This system is completely broken, but the publishers are making bank off of this. So there's a whole different incentive structure that's really messed up, and we need to solve that problem too. So there are two major incentive problems.
Seems like you could actually build out a scoring system, right, for publications versus retractions, right, for the author, but then also peer reviews, because if you're peer reviewing a paper that later gets retracted, right, there should be you should get penalized for that, right? Yeah, no, there should be a total. You could totally build that in and build out a structure and be like, your peer review, your peer review should be more powerful than someone else's peer review, right? If you haven't ever had a peer review that you haven't approved an article that ended up getting retracted, right? We should be able to figure this out. Like, it's weird that it's so loosey goosey
running on that, like that's not connected to any of them, that could be collecting this data, doing it anonymously. You'd never know from an outsider, but inside the walls of the data, they would know this, and being able to add points and deduct points depending on this. Yeah, it was.
And having that perfect 10 by your name as an academic, that would be something to aspire to. Like, my research is
this part of this podcast, right? Because we've just come up with a great idea here.
We have actually just come up with a brilliant idea. This does not exist. Just so you know, this does not exist, right?
We should invent this.
I guess we've ruined the idea that it's trade secret already.
Tom, get on this. You should do this. And you've got Vance is going to help. Josh is in. I'm the insider, so I can help, right? But we should totally do it. It should exist. The closest that we have, there's a company that it's weird. It's tied with Web of Science called Publons. If you review for certain journals, they'll keep track of the fact that you've reviewed for the journals, but there's no reviewer scoring. So that idea of like, hey, I'm actually a really good reviewer. And, if I said reject and it didn't get rejected, you don't hold that against me because I said rejected, then it gets retracted. Like, you could build all that in. You're absolutely right. That's a system that should exist. It totally should exist. And it doesn't right now.
It would give me a lot more faith in the whole peer review structure, because right now I have so little faith in it. But
sorry,
Vance, that's why we brought you on, buddy. Let's go.
Well, doable with today's technology. I mean, this isn't rocket science. We can do this.
Wow.
One other thing, this was a throwaway line in that article. I just wanted to throw in real quick. It said that there are way too many people competing for these jobs, which is contributing to the desperation of people trying to get published, right?
Yep.
That's just a whole nother facet. There was a throwaway line. We have so many kids that are we're telling them they need to be academics and they have to stay in the universities to do it when we need more plumbers. Like this is terrible.
So,
supply and demand.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The way that's working is to get a PhD, you have to go to an R1. So a research one, which is a research intensive institution, they're the ones who have PhD programs, right? But the faculty who teach in those programs only know how to be faculty in research one programs. So all they can do is replicate themselves, right? It's a really kind of narrow
it's problematic.
vision that they can't see. I can train somebody and they can go to industry, right? I can train somebody and they can go do something else. They literally, I've talked to people who have said, like, my advisor was furious when I applied to a liberal arts university, not an R1, right? Because they can only see, like, this is what you have to do. They don't understand anybody doing anything else. So we have too many people getting PhDs. We probably have too many PhDs in some disciplines, not all disciplines, in some disciplines. And then there are just not enough jobs for them. And so we've built, there are lots of problematic incentive structures that are built into the system. It's really problematic in a lot of ways.
And that's kind of sad that, it sort of turns out that way. That's almost an insider system like that. Because I remember when I did university, and I think, I had a lot of really great professors, and I'm really very grateful for how good they were and how much they helped me and to help me develop. But I remember two in particular, they were not regular faculty. One of them was with the Bank of Canada, one of the decision makers on interest rates. Fascinating to learn what they actually did in a real day-to-day world and how that applied. And then another one at that time was one of the free trade negotiators from Mexico, was doing just a summer term. And, fantastic to get that outside experience coming in and how enriching that was for everybody in that group. So it seems like we need to encourage more of that.
Yeah, for sure. No, I totally agree. Yeah, there are a lot of problems. I wish I had answers. We solved one of them. Somebody's just got to figure out how to monetize that, turn it into a business. But
Ryan, you said the other incentive structure, the other incentive.
So those were the two. So there's the publishing industry is completely broken, right? In terms of I have to pay to get my own research back, which is ridiculous, which just makes no sense,
That's
right?
awesome. That's brilliant. They're making
on
you
their
pay
part.
for your own.
Yeah,
they're doing really well on that. That's clever.
It's like a farmer growing food and then having to buy it back from the supermarket. Like,
pretty much.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
How they've.
And then the other one is just like the tenure system, right? So those are two different incentive structures, and they're both really broken, just completely broken. So there are solutions. They're just not that popular. So, sorry. I wish I had like really good news. I mean, I do love my job. I love what I do. I love all the things I do. I'm probably the weird one, right? I mean, I think there are other people out there like me who are genuine about this. They actually care. But I know there are a lot of people who are just playing the game. I hear stories about it all the time. There are problems. Sorry. It's kind of a downer.
We end the podcast on a downer.
Somebody say something positive. Come on. What do we got, Tommy? Wrap us up.
Well, it's not positive, but it's God, what's his name? I think it's Michael Malick. I think is his name. He's an anarchist, right? And I think I cited him in Malice, yeah. And but he's the one that actually he was talking. I was listening to a podcast a few weeks ago, and he was talking about trust in institutions, right? And he's like that we're having a failing trust in institutions, and this is one of the many issues I'm seeing, right? That and that's sort of the fabric that holds society together, right? It's trusting your institutions, and these problems are arising, and that we got to combat them. And so it's just this was one of several, right, where we're seeing problems, and so it's concerning, and I just want to talk about it and see like what they thought, because we need to build a better mousetrap, right? I think is what we need to do. And
I think that's such an important point, the trust in institutions, because I mean that's so much of what our society is built on, how we deal with each other today, how all the unwritten rules that don't need to be written for that reason, because we trust the institution or think we can. And do have lower trust in the institutions in the States than other of our peer countries do. Not all, but some of them. So it is an issue that we probably should be worried about, because that is not the way to keep going.
We won't keep going if trust keeps going down. Yes.
Cannot have a society that functions when you can't have trust, at least at base level across most things, right?
Yeah.
That is a worry. That is a very big worry.
Legit worry. Yeah.
Whew. All right. Well, anything from anyone else before we wrap this up?
Good.
All right. Well, I think we can all agree we need more trust in society. We found some common ground.
More independent thinking and more trust.
Down with that.
Exactly.
Love that. Love that.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I will talk to you next time.
Thanks
very much, everyone.
Josh, we may not always agree when it comes to politics, even though we're trying, but there is one thing we agree on. There is only one way to clean up after going to the bathroom, and that's with a Lux bidet.
I've been a proud owner of a Lux bidet for years. I have literally owned a Lux Neo 320 since 2013. That's the warm water model. Talk about happy, fun, poopy time. When I leave the bathroom, I know I'm clean and ready to talk politics in a civilized manner.
Exactly. Using a toilet without a bidet is about as uncivilized as it gets. Civil conversations demand civil hygiene practices.
And that is why our listeners should get themselves a Lux bidet.
And just to be clear, Lux is not supporting one side or the other in this podcast. They support civil conversations and clean butts.
Listeners can get their own Lux bidet with 10% off by ordering at luxbidet.com and using our promo code FCBG10, Finding Common Battlegrounds 10.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Finding Common Battlegrounds. The music is by Ben Sound. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not those of their employers. For more information or more episodes, you can find us at findingcommonbattlegrounds.com.